You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Philip Heitzen, and today is Friday, October 21st, 2022.
6.
In this week's Tip of the Week, I'd like to ask a simple question for you to reflect on. Are your best procurement team members excelling because they are leveraging your procurement technology, your processes, and their peers in the procurement organization? Or are they doing so because they are protecting the business from procurement? In my personal experience, I found myself protecting the business from procurement in some of my roles, in the belief that by doing so, I'd ultimately achieve the results that are required of me as a byproduct of supporting their requirements rather than my own. So if your team are protecting the business from procurement, then you obviously have an issue to address, but it's a great question to ask to become more aware of the challenge at hand and reorient your goals to be more aligned with those of the broader organization.
5.
In this week's Art of Procurement podcast, I chatted with my colleague Helen McKenzie about our observations from the recent Procurement EU conference in Barcelona that we both attended a couple of weeks ago. We discussed observation from the content sessions, but also a procurement leadership roundtable that we both facilitated in partnership with our friends at Procurement IQ. Now, I started off the roundtable with a pulse check, with the CPOs present still seeing cost increases related to inflation, and are these requests slowing down or not? The answer was pretty unanimous from this largely European-based group of procurement leaders. Cost increase requests are still coming thick and fast, and the anticipation around the room was that they would continue at that pace through the rest of the year at least. To catch more of our conversation and insights from Procurement EU, you can do so wherever you listen to your podcast or listen at artofprocurement.com/podcast.
4.
While the concern in Europe remained on inflation, it wasn't quite so pressing of a topic for the financial services and pharma CPOs who I joined at a roundtable in New York City last week. This was a great reminder that priorities and challenges for procurement leaders are very location and industry specific. So what was on the mind of this group of CPOs? Well, how can we do a better job of selling the procurement value proposition to our stakeholders? How do we manage conflicting priorities within procurement, especially in companies that are headquartered overseas, where the overseas office may have different priorities than the US-based office, for example? And how do we bring flexibility to the procurement process? Now, that topic of flexibility was one that we discussed at Mastermind Live and actually will be featured in next week's Art of Procurement podcast. Whenever I'm asked about process flexibility, I think about the logic behind vested sourcing business models, whereby you're choosing a different sourcing and contracting model based on the objectives that you're wanting to achieve. And in addition, I encourage any procurement professional to think about the procurement processes as a flywheel rather than an end-to-end linear process. 5, 6, and 7-step processes are great for building process where none existed, but the role of procurement shouldn't start when a decision has been made to buy something and end when the contract is signed. Doing so cements our position as someone who is here to support supplier selection rather than enabling the business to maximize its investment in its third-party suppliers.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Procurement has historically relied upon supplier-provided point-in-time information from unverified sources to monitor risk, resulting in significant risk exposure for companies. Now, procurement is often indecisive about supplier involvement or investment because they can't achieve world-class risk management in isolation. Procurement may end up doing nothing, by far the worst option given today's supply chain disruptions. Now, no company can afford to ignore their responsibilities with regard to risk management, and supplier-related risk is a crucial area of focus. In a recent paper, which we created in collaboration with a team at GRMS, we actually addressed 3 primary supplier risk management considerations facing procurement organizations today, and proposed a solution that lightens procurement's burden while strengthening key supplier relationships. The 3 primary considerations are: the problem that supplier risk management is a top corporate objective, but identifying and continuously monitoring supplier risk on an enterprise-wide basis is a difficult challenge for most companies. The reality that managing suppliers in multiple countries as well as staying knowledgeable about the myriad of ever-changing global watch lists and compliance regulations is nearly impossible. Resources are limited, consistent standards are not applied, and consolidated reporting is difficult at best. And the solution: when partnering with a third party to validate and monitor supplier risk, companies should ensure that the approach is founded on validated data and documents. Now, risk management is much more than a full-time job. Making partial efforts by assessing some suppliers or some risk factors, or not keeping assessments up to date in real time, it provides a lot of difficulty and offers really very little tangible value. Corporations know how important suppliers are to success, and no supplier can succeed without loyal clients. Partnerships are a key advantage in this fight against risk. You can access this paper in our resource center at artofprocurement.com/resources.
2.
Fresh off AOP Mastermind Live, we're already planning for our next digital event, which is Digital Outcomes 2023, and will take place on February the 15th and 16th next year. At Digital Outcomes, our focus is on bringing together a range of experts to focus on how digitization helps procurement drive measurable business outcomes rather than discussing features and benefits. And so as we start to build the agenda, we'd love to hear from you. Do you know of any procurement team that's using technology to 10x the outcomes that they drive? Or any providers that you are using that are helping you to do so? We'd love to hear from you via the usual channels or directly on email at contact@artofprocurement.com.
1.
We're starting to fill up the calendar with AOP Live Webinars throughout the rest of the year. On October 27th at 11 a.m. US Eastern Time, I'll be joined by 3 members of the WNS Denali team, Alpar Kamba, Julie Brignac, and Chris Eierman, to talk about how to supercharge your digital strategy. As always, there's no slides, just your questions, live discussion, and real honest answers. Now go to artofprocurement.com/calendar and sign up today, and be sure to submit a question or two while you're there. We may be presenting your questions to the speakers on October 27th.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.